we're really going to be in uncharted waters when that happens, right? Because it's really going to be the first time that this has ever happened, right? That you went from a state by state, industry to a national industry. Like whenever that does happen in whatever form that takes, it's going to be completely new. So I'm sure there's going to be disruption.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to an episode of The Dime. As always, I'm Brian Fields, and with me is Kellen Finney. And this week, we've got a very special guest, Kieve Huffman, CEO of Engager Brand. Kieve, thanks for taking the time. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Excited to dive in. Kellen, how are you?
Doing really good. Excited to talk to another West Coaster and learn about the California market as much as we can.
Yeah.
How are you, Brian?
I'm doing well. Yes, Kieve is a West Coaster, but he does have roots on the East Coast like many of our guests have. So I would say that has to be another draw. So Kieve, for our listeners that aren't familiar about you, can you share a little background about yourself?
Absolutely. So yeah, I did get my start in my career working in the music industry in New York. And so I did that for many years. Got my start I used to manage bands. I did music supervision for films. And my very first job in sort of the traditional industry, I was working for this company called Columbia House, which is predates probably you guys, but it was like the early mail order music company where pre-internet, it was the only way in a lot of places in this country you could actually get your music that wasn't being sold out of your local Walmart, So and then I kind of got involved in the transition into digital, and I was one of the early digital music guys. So I helped launch the iTunes Music Store for BMG and then Sony BMG, all the different early sort of subscription services. And honestly, that really sort of set me up very well to come out to LA and work in the cannabis industry because it's very similar, very disruptive, very no one knows the rules sometimes. And you have to be you have to be able to adapt on the fly. And that's kind of what it was in the early digital music days. So yeah, so moved out here to LA originally to kind of work in mobile I built out a mobile content studio, did a lot of early stuff in social media, and then sort of found my way into cannabis about 7 years ago. Started my first company that was a media focused company. And from there started to create brands. And now I have my own kind of portfolio of music focused cannabis brands.
So when you were kind of getting started in this space, was cannabis a big part of your life, or was it something that you just kind of migrated into through experiences and through your location?
Well, so I have a long history with the plant. I went to school at the University of Michigan, and when I went to school there, it was literally it was a $5 ticket for getting caught smoking weed and a $50 ticket for getting caught with open alcohol. So as a result, there was a lot of cannabis consumption going on in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and got to become very familiar with the plant when I was there. They have this thing every year called the Hash Bash, which is a big event that's on in the middle of campus. And it's just kind of always been one of those kind of sort of for the Midwest, one of those kind of hubs for cannabis. So then, obviously working in the music industry, a lot of cannabis consumption going on there as well. So yeah, when I kind of came out to LA and things were starting to develop, there was already when I was out here, a robust medical market. And then once we started to kind of see the writing on the wall that okay, this is probably going to go recreational here, adult use, because we started my media company at the beginning of 2015. So it was before adult use had kicked in, which was 2018. But yeah, it's all kind of it's all natural, right? It's like cannabis and music. It's just, they all kind of,
Why do you think that cannabis and music just make such a good pairing and they're just so natural together? What's your thoughts on that, Kieve?
Like dating back to the early times of jazz music, all the early jazz musicians were smoking, and really it helped them with their creativity. And some of the greatest musical works of our time certainly were enhanced by the fact that in the studio, the musicians were consuming cannabis. So, and let's face it, you go to a concert, chances are, there's billows of smoke, kind of everywhere. And so it's just kind of a natural. I think it's a sensory enhancer. It's just, they go really well together, whether it's on the creative side or whether it's on the experience side. It's just a natural fit.
So let's talk about your media company. When you first got started in the space, was it one that it took up traction pretty quickly, or it took a little more time and you kind of had to evolve the business plan over time?
It was definitely hard early on. When we started in early 2015, we had a website, and then we had a video production capabilities. And first of all, it was really hard to raise money at that time. And then second of all, it was really hard to convince cannabis companies that they should spend money to create broadcast quality video content. And because at that time, most of the video content were guys ripping bong hits on YouTube, or showing people how to do dabs, and it was pretty low end content. So people were like, oh yeah, my buddy's got a video camera. He can just do the video for us. And so there was a lot of education where it was hey guys, we need to create better quality content. And what started to help us was the fact that because most cannabis companies, and even to this day, can't really advertise the way that any other business can, we were able to come up with ways to integrate. We created programs where the cannabis services and products could be integrated into the shows. But where we had to start to evolve was that, so we'd create this great video content, and then it was really hard to be able to drive people to be able to see it, because same issues. Can't run Facebook ads, can't, do, Google ad buys for this content. So we ended up having to create the first multi-platform video network for cannabis. And so we were able to create that, and we were on Apple TV, Amazon, Roku TV. We were on about 14 different platforms. And so we were kind of early pioneers when it came to creating sort of professional, content in the industry. And it was not easy at all early on. It became a lot easier when what started to become what was called the green rush, which was 2017, 2018. That's when we raised all of our money. And that's when things were kind of, sort of really going nuts. But leading into that, we were early, and it was hard.
Take us through some of those conversations that you're having in the early days, trying to get this idea off the ground.
Well, so which conversations with potential customers or conversations with potential investors?
Let's say with investors first. And then what changed, do you think? Was it just the green rush in the media? And then did they start approaching you? And how did that whole situation kind of adapt over from 2016 to 2018?
Yeah, so early on with the investors, it was why? Well, there's already high times. So why do we need another media company in cannabis? So our whole thing was well, look, High Times is really focused, and at this time, our whole thesis for why we wanted to create the company, and it was called Prohibited, was the name of the company, and the website. And the reason we wanted to create it was when we took a look at what was going on in the market at that time, the vast majority of content that was being created for like about 10% of the audience. And that 10% were like the, you know, the daily like heavy consumers, the dabbers, the like stoner bros, whatever you want to call it. Like, but like if you look at like consumers, like there's tons of people that consume cannabis that don't fit into that demographic, right? That
Agreed.
which is like the other 90%. And so what we had to convince investors was like, look, we're going to create content that 10% is going to, they may like some of it, but our focus is going to be on the other 90%, because what a great opportunity is this. It's like no one is doing anything for this other audience, whether it be housewives or elderly or professionals of, different sorts, where it's like, hey, let's figure out how to bridge the gap from sort of this sort of legacy industry to a more sort of mainstream audience. And over time, it became clear that this was like the way things were going. And so, yeah, things changed. Look, a lot of things started to change because, look, a lot of different states started to go legal. And then, California went, recreational, and then Canada went legal. So all those things kind of happening. And that's when sort of that triggered the sort of what we called at the time the green rush, right? And a lot of that money was triggered out of the Canadian public markets, right? Because all those Canadian companies were funded they all went public. And if you wanted to invest in cannabis and you were just like a regular investor, the only way that you could do that was to go and invest into these Canadian companies. And so we reaped the benefit of that. And then the bottom fell out in 2019 when like kind of it was like the emperor wears no clothes. Like it was like, well, wait a minute, these Canadian companies actually aren't making money yet. And in fact, they can only still sell to Canadians. And you know what? Canada is actually not that big of a country, and there's not that many consumers in Canada. And it was like, okay, these companies are greatly overvalued. And then there were some bad actors that were involved, and some bad business practices and some different things. So then, yeah, and then that all happened, and then we went into COVID. And so honestly, we're still kind of starting to kind of come out of this, of like what it's going to end up being with this next sort of iteration of the cannabis industry is still somewhat being determined right now.
Yeah, the industry is still in its infancy stage. And I would wonder if it still hasn't established what a real normal is for how an industry operates, because it is still so new. And as you were saying, Kieve, is that it was one way for a little bit, and then the world evolved, and then COVID happened, and then it was another way, and the world evolved. And we still yet haven't seen what the future landscape holds, which means disruptors like yourself are led to more and more challenges. So I'm interested in kind of diagnosing some of those. So obviously coming from the music background and your skilled expertise there, and then applying it to the cannabis industry is layered with different challenges outside of capital and kind of distribution aspects. What other challenges did you see that were similar that you had to overcome from, let's say, the music cannabis background?
Well, there were a lot more challenges that were unique to this industry than there were similar. I mean, I think that's the hardest thing for people that are coming in from the outside, like where it's like, oh my God, I can't use my same toolkit, for this industry. What do you mean I can't advertise on Instagram? What do you mean I can't talk about this, that, or the other? So, for us, and we're creating, essentially, we're creating brands, right? And driving demand for those brands. Where I did find similarities were like, look, because we're focused on music, like we know where this audience is, right? They're at the shows, they're at the festivals. And so I leveraged my background in doing a lot of live event, activations and promotions, and through my connections with promoters and managers and agents, we're able to go and activate at festivals and concerts directly to the audience there, which right now is pretty unique because most cannabis like brands are kind of like, I almost call it like they're marketing within the cannabis bubble, right? Like there's these events and there's these sites and there's things that are just like all for kind of the cannabis, audience. But as you guys know, like probably I would venture most cannabis consumers don't necessarily just live in that world, right? Cannabis is it's just another aspect of their lifestyle and what they do. So, I think that what we're going to start to see more and more of, and we're trying to lead the way here, is going out and marketing to these audiences outside of that cannabis bubble, right? And so for us, that's going directly to the shows, to the festivals. We set up booths, we do activations there. We do a lot of ticket giveaways with dispensary partners on our website. We do a lot of stuff with bands where we do collabs with artists and things like that. So I think there are some similarities from my music industry days that I'm able to tap into. And then there's a lot of just, as anything that touches cannabis, there's always the things that are completely unique, the roadblocks that you just have to deal with on a regular basis as well.
Why do you think that some of the bands that have kind of launched their own brand haven't created as much value as you would anticipate, just based on the natural pairing of cannabis and music? I mean, I'm thinking like Willie Nelson and the Marley family. You've kind of seen a couple of these iterations of using some of these bigger bands' names to try to launch a brand in the cannabis space, and it just hasn't resonated, and it hasn't created the same value, I think, that a lot of people anticipated when you see other celebrities kind of enter other industries. What are your thoughts on that?
There's a lot of inherent challenges, right? So, I mean, I'd say like, look, at least the two that you mentioned still exist. Like there's been like, they would be considered the success stories, actually.
Right.
A lot more what you see, particularly in rap, where like, someone comes in, whether it's vanity, they want to have their own strain, or whether it's, more often than not, they think they're going to be able to come in and make a quick buck. And the reality is, in this industry, it's really hard to build a brand, and so in order to really do it in a way that's going to be lasting, is you've got to come in, and if you're an artist or a band, then you've really got to actively be promoting it and out there working it. So I would say that the brands that have been successful from a celebrity standpoint have been like, Leafs by Snoop, because Snoop's outliving it. Insane by Be Real. He's out there, he's living it. Also, I will say that both those brands, by the way, don't have the band's name in the brand also. So it's like, and I think that's important too. It's like, because the audience is kind of fickle. Like, so at my agency, so we ended up at my last company, we ended up helping other companies incubate their brands. We ended up creating sort of an agency. And one of the brands that we helped create was for a brand called 22 Red. And 22 Red was and still is, a brand that was created by Chavo from the band System of the Down. And one of the things that we had talked about early on with them was the importance of creating this as a standalone brand and not having it be just Chavo's weed, whatever you want to call it, Chavo's strain. It's like, because first of all, the audience kind of like is a lot more sophisticated, I think, than a lot of these bands like give them credit for. And as a result, like they can see through it. Like, so like, it's like if they feel like someone's just slapping their name on it, it's like, they're like, that doesn't feel right. Or they'll go out and try it once. And then chances are, because it's celebrity endorsed, it's marked up as a premium so that the artist gets their cut. So it's like, wait a minute, for what I just paid, I could pay less, and get just as good or better, over here. So like, why am I going to pay this just to get the celebrity's name on it. It just doesn't make sense. So I think there's a lot of reasons for why it hasn't worked. But at the end of the day, I think it comes down to ultimately the brands that will have any affiliation with an artist that work are going to be the ones where the artist integrates it into everything that they're doing. They're actively out there promoting it. They're involved with it. And I think that's where you run into the issue with like some of these, like Marley, it's like, it's an estate, So it's like, even though it feels like that should have worked, it's like, you don't really authentically have anyone out there actively sort of working it, because obviously, Bob Marley's not around to be able to do that. And even with Willie Nelson, like, Willie's not, he's no spring chicken right now. He's like not exactly out there, actively working things. So,
Yeah.
Look, I think there's a lot of challenges and like, but it's, to your point though, I think it is correct. Like there really haven't been to this state any super meaningful, like quote unquote celebrity brands yet.
Yeah.
There's a trust factor too. And I think you described it perfectly that when consumers go in and they see the likeness of a celebrity on it, maybe they try it one time, but if the product doesn't adhere to their expectations they'll likely tell their friends and that'll be the end of that product. And if that influencer per se is not including it in their lifestyle, it kind of loses its flair, right? Maybe there's like a big push by a PR firm, but after that, the big leverage, because you don't have your normal toolbox, is the influencer's platform on social media, right? Creating content around it, constantly showing his fan base the products and integrating into their lifestyle. So who is somebody that can come in from the music space or an actor or an athlete that you think can, let's say, take it to the new level from an influencer partnership standpoint to really put their name on a brand to kind of establish themselves, let's say, as a credible individual?
Well, look, I don't know necessarily like who I would say who isn't already in, because anyone who's kind of a natural is already doing something.
Sure.
Like you can argue how well they're doing it. But look, I think there is one other sort of big elephant in the room here, which is just the fact that whether you're building a celebrity brand or any brand, the fact that you as a brand, you're not the cultivator, right? You're not the manufacturer, and you're in a country that has no interstate commerce, right? So in order to truly like build, like in any other industry, like if you were going to come and do a celebrity endorsed brand, like you would do a huge national campaign, right? Well, you can't do that in this industry, right? And so it's really challenging, right? Because like, okay, well, you have to kind of pick a state to start with, right? And then everyone seems to pick California. And then California is, I think there's something like 4,000 brands in California right now that are fighting to get on into like 1,000 shops, right? So it's a crowded market here, And then on top of that, you don't ultimately control the end product, unless you have really good quality, control, which is something that's very important to us and that we make sure that we build into all of our SOPs for everything. But like, for instance, we're going into Michigan next. Is going to be our next state. And we're in the process now of like making sure it's like, you can't have the exact same product that we have here in California in Michigan. It's just impossible because you can't ship over, state lines. So all we can focus on, and this is the same thing that a celebrity, brand can focus on, it's just making sure that it's the same outcome, like the same experience. And it's the same basic quality and the same, because otherwise you're going to have this issue where, yeah, to your point, like people are going to try it once. And if it doesn't match with what they're expecting, you get one shot at a first impression, right? And if it doesn't work, then you're out of luck and you gotta, you might as well hang it up and try again with something else, because you're not going to get another chance.
You mentioned that your guys' products won't be the same in Michigan, but it'll hopefully create the same experience. Is this kind of comparable to how Coca-Cola tastes different in Mexico than it does in the United States? Would that be
very much
similar?
I think that's a perfect example, and I've used it before because, there's Coke. Like there's Coke, there's McDonald's, like it's country by country, like the source materials are different in these different countries. So there's going to be slight nuances. And it's kind of similar in cannabis here when you go state to state. Like, let's face it, even if you can get the same exact genetics and the same exact seeds, it's going to be a different, it's going to be slightly different soil, slightly different growing conditions. Like there's no way to exactly replicate. So all you can try to do is to make sure that the brand promise comes through, right? Of whatever that brand is, and that that the products adhere to that to the best of your abilities. And it's just one of those underlying challenges, that we have in this industry, right? It's just like any of the we're starting to see more and more multi-state brands are starting to roll out. It's something that we all have to deal with. There's no easy answer to it, honestly. And in some ways, you kind of have to embrace it. Like some people like Mexican Coke better than the Coke, right? So.
Do you think there's any potential harm that could come from a brand, say in 5 years when interstate commerce maybe does open up and they're like, I've been buying this one pre-roll for 5 years in Michigan, and all of a sudden now I go to California and buy the same thing and it's a completely different product? Do you see any issues with brands once interstate commerce does come online, hopefully in our lifetime?
Yeah, hopefully. I mean, our federal government certainly hasn't been doing us any favors. I've been in this now for almost 8 years in cannabis, and we haven't made any ground on the federal level.
We're approaching 10 years of legal cannabis in Colorado. 10 years.
They're talking about it now, so that has to be some semblance of progress.
What?
They're talking about it. That's huge.
Yeah, it's frustrating, that's for sure. But getting back to your original question, I mean, look, we're really going to be in uncharted waters when that happens, right? Because it's really going to be the first time that this has ever happened, right? That you went from a state by state, industry to a national industry. Like whenever that does happen in whatever form that takes, it's going to be completely new. So I'm sure there's going to be disruption, right? Like, because what was working for, whether it was like the supply chains or whether it's the end consumer, like the products themselves that they're used to, things are going to change when it does go federally legal. Ultimately, it will all work out, and it's ultimately going to be better for everyone. It's going to be better for the industry. It's going to be better for consumers. It's all, obviously it's going to be, a more optimal experience when you can have consistency, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel state by state. I mean, that's just crazy, right? I mean, it's just
wild. It's wild. I mean, we're talking about the product. We haven't even mentioned the packaging has to be different. It's wild, right?
I was just talking to someone in Ohio the other day, and I had no idea, but Ohio apparently they have completely different package sizes for everything. So if you want to go into Ohio, you can't even just the same, because they have different weight system there that they use. So I'm like, really? So yeah, it's just crazy.
But to kind of push back a little bit, though, I think it's so important for the brands now to do things the right way, because they have such an early head start. And with new states coming online, specifically here in New York, these consumers that go in for the first time or experiencing, legal cannabis, they're looking for a product to associate with, because, right, all it takes is that one experience where you said, I grabbed this product, I loved it, and then likely would go back a second and third time. So I think first movers advantage is so huge now. And I think you see conversations like that happening where the big MSOs are a little more frustrated with the pace of the way they're opening up the licenses here in New York. But But in California, right, it's a fight for the shelf. So I'm wondering now, from a branding perspective, how can companies like yourself help position these brands to move forward, to do things the right way, to educate the consumer so that they understand what they're purchasing and they can build that sort of trust factors in the future?
Well, for us, I think we're a little unique in our approach because, when we go to New York, we're going to take the same approach. We're going to go to the concerts and the festivals, and we're going to go out, because for us, we have a very specific target audience that we're going after. And, there's 74 million hard rock and heavy metal music fans in the US. That's one of our brands called Heavy Grass, and that's focused on that audience. There are around 40 million electronic dance music fans. We've got another brand called Neon Roots.
What's the difference in the two? Can you kind of share a little bit of the difference in the two?
Yeah, so Heavy Grass is sort of like the Jack Daniels for weed. It's flower brand. It's steady. It's consistent. It gets the job done, but it doesn't break the bank. It's not your well drink, but it's not your like super high end either. It's sort of that. It's that step above the value brands, but it's not sort of on the lower end of the mid tier and the higher end of the value. And then Neon Roots is really more about enhancing sort of the experience of going to a festival or a rave. So for that brand, we have these infused pre-rolls that are infused with THCA diamonds and batter and different terpenes that will enhance different aspects of the evening. So we have one that's for the pre-party, for when it's like liftoff, like I need to just kind of go. And then there's one that's called our up-tempo. And then we've got our Neuro, which is like, okay, I'm at the party and I just want to keep going. I don't want to get tired. And I want to be able to sort of enhance everything else that's going on. And then there's the chill out, which is I get home and I just need to go to sleep. And so very different sort of approaches, of Heavy Grass is very much, it's just this flower products. It's flower and pre-rolls. And then for Neon Roots, it's very much around this sort of infused pre-roll, sort of optimized experience. And these products and these pre-rolls are obviously premium products, right? They're much more of the, they'll retail at like $35 or $40 for one of these infused pre-rolls. But they also will last all night and work, for multiple people. They're definitely not single use products. So those are for us, we're going to be going out there in every market that we go out and bringing these products directly as much as we can. Obviously, that's the other thing for what we do. Even to this day in California, there's very few places where you can do sales and consumption at music festivals. And the big issue there is the fact that they don't allow alcohol sales and consumption to be in the same place as cannabis sales and consumption, which again is like, doesn't make any sense, but it is what it is. So typically the way that you have to do it is you have to set up your sales and consumption either right outside the venue, or you have to have a separate entrance. So like Outside Lands, which is a big festival out in San Francisco, they have their area where you have to actually go and enter in through a different, way. They don't allow alcohol in there, but you can do sales and consumption. So, we do what we can, as far as the education part of it is concerned, it's tricky because, when you're a brand, in this space, there's not huge margins right now, right? No. So it's hard to put a lot of money into education, as much as we would like. It's like we just kind of focus on just building our brands and making sure that we kind of survive to live another day, versus like putting a lot of money into kind of how we educate consumers. But I do feel it's a hugely important part of it. It's just it's tough to put that burden on the brands because like we just don't have big budgets to be able to support it.
What is one concept operating in the cannabis industry that would shock others to know?
Oh, that's a loaded question. I don't know how much I want to go into some of the things that are happening because don't want to get anyone into trouble. Let's just say that, and I mean, you've probably already seen this in New York. There's a lot of California brands that are in other states right now and are in other countries right now. And, there's a lot of stuff that's happening that where like, people are just getting creative to figure out how to make stuff happen. And, it may not be 100%, cookie cutter by the book, to make it happen. But it's also it's filling a market need because there's a demand for these brands and there's interest in these brands. So yeah, look, I'd say that that's probably the one thing. It's like, look, there's a lot of stuff going on out there right now that is not exactly going by the letter of the law.
I think when you have creative rules, you have people find creative workarounds. And I think that would surprise a lot of people. But at the end of the day, they didn't make the rules. They're just following the way the game is being played.
Yeah. I mean, look,
don't hit the player, hit the game.
Look, I've seen a lot of creativity in this industry and, just sometimes like it goes longer. Like I thought Delta 8 was going to be a flash in the pan, right? Like to me, like that was like, there's only a matter of time that's going to get slapped down.
Same.
And it's still going strong, right? Like in a lot of states, like Delta 8 is that sort of creative workaround for a lot of brands right now. And it's
been a lifeboat for a lot of hemp companies too, right? I mean, so many companies just went balls to the walls and made as much CBD isolate as they could. And they turned around and they're like, well, no one's buying this. What do we do with it? And so I get it. And it's not the right way to do it, but I don't like, you know what I mean? When you're in between a rock and a hard place.
Everyone's trying to survive,
survival.
The demand is high. People want cannabis products. So they're going to find outlets.
Don't say it's close enough, right?
I mean, it's close enough if it's all you got.
Same but different?
Same but different.
I mean, I don't know about you guys. My experience is it doesn't do anything for me, but like for people that don't regularly smoke cannabis, like that have tried Delta, they tell me that they definitely feel it. So it's, it's just, there's so, look, I think it's the one thing that is the most interesting, I think, unique about like cannabis is that there's a lot of gray out there, right? And it's like, and I wouldn't even call it like, look, there's deeper shades of gray, where it's like, certainly like that, some are more comfortable playing in than others, but a lot of the gray, it's really not black or white, right? Like whether or not something is like okay to do. And so like, it's just sort of like, if you're not doing it, then you're losing ground, right?
Yeah.
It's like the others that are like willing to kind of put themselves out there. And I thought a lot in the early CBD days where at my last company, I kind of look back on it and say, you know what, we purposely didn't aggressively go into some of these CBD, particularly the CBD ingestible products, because we knew that the FDA was going to come down hard eventually and that they weren't truly like quote unquote legal products. Well, it took the FDA about 1.5 to 2 years to come down, and they're coming down hard. Were like sternly worded letters, and that was it. And meanwhile, there were a lot of companies that made a lot of money selling those CBD products online, aggressively making health claims, making all kinds of things. And it was like, you look back on it now and say, oh, you know what? Like, kudos to them. They made the money doing that, and it was like, hey, shame on us. We could have, like And we didn't because we decided to listen to our lawyers. And, it's like listening to your lawyers in this industry is, maybe not always the clearest path to revenue.
You should send a bill to your lawyers for revenue missed by them, right? For all their legal fees telling you not to. How do you connect with underserved demographics in the cannabis market in states that are not yet legal?
So the way we're doing it is we're selling our non-THC products to them so that we're building brand awareness, we're building an affinity and a connection to that audience. So in some places it may literally just be apparel, right? And or maybe it's accessories. We've got these branded smoke kits that we sell that have like a grinder kind of built into them, and they're little dugouts. Just whatever it is that is legal to be sold. We at least want to build that connection and make sure. And obviously, the products have to have utility to them, and they have to connect, and they have to make sense for that audience. But that's the way that we're doing it, and it's kind of taking a page out of the cookies model, right? Cookies, they kind of paved the way, and by going out strong with apparel and merch and stuff, and it's like, hey, they got that brand awareness, and it served them very well, right? Because anytime they open up in a new state, there's lines out the door, right? Because they've got brand awareness. Whatever you want to say about like how you feel about cookies one way or another, those guys figured out how to build a brand that kind of worked nationally, and I think they're the only brand that's really been able to do that so far in cannabis.
I agree. I would say Select maybe, but I think that Kira kind of dropped the ball on scaling and getting Select around the country, in my opinion. But also, that's a different story.
Cookies has Burner. Who does Select have?
Exactly. And I think that is huge.
I think a lot of musicians see Burner and so I've got more followers than Burner. I've got more publicity than Burner. I can do exactly what he's done. And a lot of people have come in, bigger names, and have not been able to execute on the same level. But kudos to him. He lives the lifestyle, right? It is him. And I think there's some authenticity to that and some trust factors behind that. When you get a Cookies product, you know what you're going to get. And I think a lot of that has to do with the way he's built his brand.
Yeah, it's the fact that he came from the traditional industry. He understands the plant significantly better than probably most other C-level executives that are making kind of business-minded decisions. And the biggest thing with Cookies is they don't grow anything. So the fact that they can create consistency from a quality perspective across state lines just speaks volumes to their true understanding of the plant from a procurement perspective. Because they go into new states and they handpick their partners. And they don't just handpick them willy-nilly. Burner goes in and looks at all their cultivation. He talks to the growers. He knows what they're using. So it's his deep-seated understanding of the entire industry that has been transitioned from the traditional market. And I think he's just been kind of the success story of utilizing of kind of like the poster child of being able to take those skills that were generated and nurtured in the traditional market and then being able to apply them into the legal market with success.
Absolutely. Hey, kudos to him, man. Look, I was turning 14, a son, and we went into Zoomies the other day and I bought him. He really wanted these Cookies sweatpants, and it's like Cookies had a full display at Zoomies. And it's like, it's crazy, right? But it's like they've truly transcended, like, just, they've created a brand, right? Yes. And that brand, to their credit, that brand means different things to different people. Like that Cookies means something very different to my 14-year-old son. Now, granted, I didn't tell his mom what Cookies was, but
I'd like to know how that conversation goes.
And I told my son not to. He's like, "What's Cookies?" I'm like, "Oh, it's a weed brand." He's like, "Oh,
The Cookie Monsters brand.
Are you seeing Sesame Street?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But I think that that's really the direction that, more brands should be looking towards. And it's a model that we're very much kind of adhering to. I mean, we're not really building our brands around celebrities, and I think Burner's a pretty unique, like you can't really replicate a Burner, right? Like that's like, he's a unique case story because he's authentically from the industry from many, 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 many years. He authentically knows the plant, and he is also a musician, right? There's really, like, I think there's one of him in the world probably that really could have done what he did. And kudos to him, he did it. But what we're doing is we're focused very much on these lifestyles that there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to find like Neon Roots, like apparel and Zoomies one day, right? Like, because it kind of stands for the cannabis culture of the rave scene. Like, if we've done our job correctly, that's what we're gonna have achieved. So, and I think that that's kind of what we aspire to. So, I'm thrilled. Like, I know there's a lot of haters out there, but like, I'm thrilled for the success of Cookies, because to me it shows that it's possible, right, to have national success in a cannabis brand.
Yeah, proof of concept. 20 years from now, we will look back and say, that was barbaric. I can't believe we did that in the cannabis industry. What is that?
Well, barbaric. I don't know about barbaric, but I mean, I just think that at some point we're going to look back and just say, like how crazy was it that literally we couldn't promote our products on social media or on, just like we can't talk openly about this plant, right? Is like, to me, I guess I would consider it barbaric, because it's like there are so many like useful benefits to this plant that by withholding this information, we're kind of playing into the fact that, that we're playing into the misinformation, right? By making it banned information, for us not being able to kind of treat it the way that it should be treated as a product, as a plant, we're basically buying into the stereotypes, because like, oh, there must be something wrong with it, because, you can't talk about it, openly, and you can't. And I've seen it, and like, there's been a huge mind shift, right, with the older generations, right, because they started to now understand the medicinal benefits of it. And I can speak to my parents, like, who were very anti, but have completely changed because they've seen, either for themselves or their peers, ways that cannabis has helped them get off of other pharmaceuticals, right, or other things that are just like so much worse for you, right? It's like, oh, it's plant-based, and that I can take this for my arthritis versus like taking this like nasty pharmaceutical. But there's still the stigmas, and so to me, like, this whole thing about the stigmas that we're playing into still, that's something that we'll look back in 20 years. And hopefully my 14-year-old son will be like, what do you mean you couldn't talk about what you were doing, with cannabis, like on your social media profile? That's crazy, So yeah, I hope we can get over this sooner rather than later, because it's kind of, it's sort of crazy, ridiculous to me that it's still going on this way.
I hope so. All right, Keith, before we do predictions, we ask all of our guests if you could sum up your experience in a main takeaway or lesson learned to pass on to the next generation, what would it be?
The thing that I've learned, it's like, always be curious, always want to learn more, because the world is always changing. It's going to continue to change. And the people that I find that are the most miserable in life are the ones that are always bitching and moaning about how things are changing. So embrace the change, embrace the chaos, because That's how you're going to fully enjoy life. And that's how you're going to ultimately, I think, be able to get ahead. Because the people that are adaptable are the ones that are going to reap the benefits of the changes that happen.
All right. Prediction time. Kieve, do brands outside of cookies travel? If not, how will they travel and when?
Definitely brands outside cookies will travel.
Do they travel now?
I will predict that over the next 12 to 24 months, we will see other brands that will travel, and I think that accelerates significantly if we get any level of federal relief at all, even if it's just something like Safe Banking Act or just something that just starts to sort of unlock. Because the challenge that brands like mine have right now is that we're capital constrained. Like, I can't, because cookies has like such a head start, like they can go out and go into these other states where it's very challenging for brands like ours to go out state by state without raising a lot of money. And it's impossible to raise a lot of money right now in cannabis. Like, I don't care where you sit in out there, unless you're in maybe the top 1% of companies, like you're not really raising significant capital right now.
Kellen.
I do think brands travel, so I agree. I think I'm thinking of Wild, WYLD, right? The gummies. I mean, I think that was the first brand that traveled it from my perception. I saw that brand across state lines way before I saw cookies. But then I think cookies is more of a representative of the cannabis space. But I think that in the next 5 years, Kieve touched on this earlier in the conversation, a lot of like the brands right now have tried to kind of like hook their wagon to that like stereotypical cannabis persona. And I think that that's slowly going to change. And like, as you see cookies with their apparel, I think that there's going to be really, really strong brands that come out that differentiate the branding from kind of the cannabis culture in a way that resonates with that other 90%, where people feel comfortable going in and purchasing it and it doesn't scream, I'm a stoner and I smoke weed all the time kind of a situation. So I think that it just is kind of a balancing act. And I don't know if the brands out there have gotten it right and they just haven't been able to get that kind of large exposure yet because of the capital constraints that Kieve mentioned. But I do think that brands will travel. I think there are a couple brands that traveled. And I do think that in the future, it's going to be brands that kind of have that lifestyle aspect that's going to travel the best, in my opinion. What do you think, Brian?
I do not think brands will travel. I think that unless we have a Kardashian-like person enter the space and absolutely disrupt it, or some sort of federal legislation that allows for that, I don't think brands will travel. I think that consumers will find a product early on in their market that they like, and I think they will repeat it, purchase over and over again for the end of time. I'm thinking specifically about the older generation who is a little more hesitant and then finally finds a product that suits their needs. I see them sticking in forever and not changing again. I would say maybe for the younger generation, the Gen Zs, maybe that would be a different version, but I'm thinking more about the older, let's say 30 and up person. And I would say that I do not think brands will travel, at least in the future.
I like it. Take the other side, right?
Yeah, I went for it. So Kieve, for our listeners, they want to get in touch. They want to learn more. Where can they find you?
So I'm Kieve at engagerbrands.com is my email. And then I'm very active on LinkedIn. That's sort of my main social media profile. You can always reach out to me there. Just search me there. And then engagerbrands.com, you can also use that to find all of our brands from there, whether it be Heavy Grass or Neon Roots.
We'll link
any place that they can come see you guys? You guys doing any events recently?
Yeah, so we will be at the Aftershock Festival in Sacramento for 4 days. There's going to be 140,000 people there over 4 days. It's a huge event, one of the biggest rock shows. We activate every year there for Heavy Grass. So if you're there, please come by. We'll be in what's called the Loud Lounge, which is where they do their cannabis. It's October 6th through the 9th.
Awesome.
Yeah, we'll link those up in the show notes. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, guys.